Welcome to Community Connections, brought to you by Synapsity, featuring conversations, stories, and interviews with Ottawa's leading changemakers. Enjoy this episode. Welcome into another episode of Community Connections, and today we feature an interview with Eva Oloumi from Paradeigma. Welcome in, everybody, to another episode of Community Connections brought to you by Synapsity. And today we have Eva Oloumi. And Eva is best engaged in service of mission-critical challenges or opportunities that require navigating complexity or those that are reliant on divergent sets of stakeholder groups for moving forward. So perfect for us at Synapsity to talk to. She draws on 12 years of strategy, systems transformation, and collaborative design experience to help coalitions create innovative solutions in critical contexts when it becomes apparent that their current strategies will only maintain the status quo. Love that. Eva is worked with the leading international NGOs and Fortune 1000s to tackle seemingly unsolvable problems such as vaccine equity and distribution, sustainability in mining, food security, and housing crisis. She holds an MBA from Sprott School of Business and is the founder and CEO of Paradeigma. So welcome in.
Thank you. Thank you.
So you
Appreciate
have
you.
some, yeah, great to be here. So you have some incredible career experience from your time at Sprott to your work with Impact Hub and launching your latest endeavor. We're going to chat about all of those today, but I want to start off with your backstory. Just what lit your spark for transformative systems building?
Yeah, good question. I just remember growing up and thinking about why things were the way they were. I think part of that comes from being a first generation immigrant and being able to compare different systems to each other. And so I was always thinking about why is it that we do things this way and other people do things in a different context in a different way, and which way is better, and comparing the way things were done. And I remember, traveling a lot, being on planes and thinking, hey, if they did it this way, it would be a lot more of a comfortable experience or whatever it happened to be. And so I was always really, really interested in kind of thinking through contexts and scenarios and problems. And it was a bit of a game for me. I'm an only child, so I spent a lot of time on my own. So I would think I would think through, how come things are set up like this all the time? And I remember being in the back seat of cars or in planes and just having all this time to think about this stuff, and being interested in it. So that's probably where it originated. And then I actually attended an art school, completely different, but in a way similar, where you're trying to you're using a creative process in order to develop something. Um, and then I rebelled against that, thinking I didn't want to do any more art after I was done with art school in high school, which was Canterbury High School here in Ottawa, and going into law, thinking that would be the mechanism or the shell within which I could solve problems. And so it's kind of been a running through line throughout my journey, is I just wanted to solve really complex problems. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's awesome. Something we try to do at Synapsity, get people talking, get stakeholders together, and love the pivot from the art to law to kind of systems changing, right? It's all kind of creativity and puzzle matching. So that's great. Let's talk a little bit about your time at Sprott and what you gained. We're excited to be partnering with Sprott on our 2024 Civics Boot Camp, which is just recently launched. I'd love to hear a little bit about how Sprott may have influenced your journey.
Yeah, yeah, actually that's a good segue from what I just told you, because I remember being a fourth year law student and kind of being really frustrated, and sharing with someone that what I wanted to do was actually being akin to like a doctor for organizations. I wanted to go and, diagnose their problems and show them how to do things differently. And at that time, I didn't have the vocabulary to know that what I wanted to do, I guess, was consulting. And then, getting advice that maybe I should go to business school. And so Sprout was pretty foundational for me in terms of getting exposure to that world, and getting, yeah, like I said, even the vocabulary, like I didn't know that this world existed in my undergrad, which was probably pretty naive of me. But going to business school kind of opened up a world of possibilities in terms of hey, there's actually a discipline focused on this type of problem solving, and you can go and learn it, and you can get connected to other people who can, who are doing this or can teach you or connect you with even more people that might be in the design world or might be in the foresight world, etc. And so Sprout was a great experience for me and really foundational in setting that up. And it's an excellent program, and it's very accessible, especially to residents of Ottawa. The way that it's been set up is you know, it's a very, I don't know if it's still like this, but when I was at Sprott, it was recently converted from a Master of Management Sciences. And so it was not a well-known MBA program, but it also made that very financially accessible for most people. So
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, great to kind of build connections and build out your network. And that's just as important sometimes as what you're learning, right? And certainly for our civics boot camp as well, for folks to kind of build that network out and meet people. And those are the people that you generally are interacting with after. So after you went on from Sprott, you went on to do some incredible things. You helped lead strategy sessions for one of Canada's largest naturopathic brands. You launched critical health and safety programs. And I'm wondering, for those that may just be entering the workforce, can you offer some advice on ways to grow your skill sets and find new opportunities early in your career?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's been some real macro trends and shifts over the last 10 years or so, which are really positive in some ways for people that are just entering the workforce in terms of making things accessible. So, and I'm just talking about moving away from like biggie education into what you can find um, just online. There you have access to so much, and then let alone the knowledge that you have access to people in a way that you haven't had in the past. Thinking through things like social networks, LinkedIn, etc., you can actually attend events that you wouldn't necessarily be able to. You can attend conferences, you can network with people, you can really take ownership of your career in that way, in a way that was not necessarily available when I started off my career in the same way, where I could, get access to some of this information. Um, I mean, it was more held closely in elite circles, some of the information that I'm talking about. And so now a lot of that is being democratized. And there's also shifts in terms of wanting to democratize that information, just thinking about things like collaborative design, which is the world that I work in. About 10, 15 years ago, was very tightly held practice where you had to know the right people in order to even to even get access to the methodology. Whereas now, there's a major shift in the way that people are thinking about who needs to be involved in these processes. And therefore, there is a drive to democratize and share this knowledge with the rest of the world, recognizing that it's really important for many people to get access to these skills in order to be able to tackle some of the greater challenges that we're going to be working towards in the next, well, who knows how long with the climate crisis, but in the next little while, we're gonna need to collaborate better. And so there's this big push to make some of this information available to everybody. And then really the network. I mean, the fact that you can get access to all sorts of people, and my experience has been, if I were to advise myself when I was younger, my experience has been that people are willing to speak to you if you've got something interesting to say, or if you've got something interesting to ask, and people are willing to help. And so my advice would be, don't be scared of reaching out to whoever you want to in this world. I regularly do so at this point weekly, and I have been doing so for a long time in my career. And so not being intimidated by fancy titles, fancy organizations, fancy schools, whatever it happens to be, and feeling comfortable to reach out to people. And on that, I would also say, I personally place a high value on what I call demonstrated competence. So, the people that I collaborate with or work with, I get really annoyed when people are puffing themselves up by name dropping. Um, speak to me and let me know that you know what you're talking about. And that's much more valuable than who you know, where you've been, etc. And so that would also be my advice to anybody is fall in love with the work that you do and get really nerdy about it, for lack of a better term, and demonstrate your competence.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just so many resources out there. You go on your LinkedIn and you just have notifications of folks and different trainings and things out there. So great advice. A lot of stuff can be self-taught these days, or you can kind of find the information and kind of go down that rabbit hole, right? And that leads nicely to my next question. Here at Synapsity, we energize and activate people and institutions to converse open mindsets, understand viewpoints, and work together as city makers. I'm wondering from your experience, how do we convene folks in this modern age?
How do we convene folks? I mean, I think what you're asking is how do we build community? Um, and there's so many ways to do that. Um, But what I would say is to be really mindful about what you're trying to achieve when you're convening. So, and then who needs to be there in order to make that happen. So when I am convening, or when I'm designing an intervention, some of the things that I'm thinking about are, who are the right participants, and not only from a facilitator or input perspective, but who else needs to be in the room to make that actually executable or applicable in the future. I'm thinking about what's the right environment. Um, the pandemic has given us this great gift of Zoom, which means that we can involve more people into processes. But even with that tech, sometimes it's not possible to involve people. And I'm thinking about people in remote communities in Canada's North, et cetera, that should be part of conversations that don't always get to be a part of them, and not taking connectivity for granted. I'm also thinking about the environment in terms of how we set up the space, right? Everything speaks, including placement of furniture. Are we setting people up to hear a lecture, or are we setting people up to have a conversation? And that's a different configuration of the room. And then what's the right inputs into the conversation? So when you're convening people, um, you have to meet people where they are, which means that you have to make the content and the inputs into the conversation easy and accessible for them, so that it's bite-sized and they can actually work with it. And so that those are sort of some of the things that I'm thinking about when I'm convening groups or trying to build community is to enable people to have the right starting point to have a good conversation, which means that you need to kind of allow people time to get onto the same page. So that's my 2 cents about that.
Yeah, no, those are some great tips, right? It's all about kind of creating that sort of environment for that kind of dialogue, and creating that dialogue is big for Synapsity. We encourage that dialogue over debate, where folks are able to talk with each other and not necessarily over each other, and respect each other's diverse opinions. And from your experience, how do we include folks who might be critics of our ideas into our discussions and events? And that's something that's very important to Synapsity. How are we able to kind of bring those different viewpoints together?
Yeah, I think that's actually a really important question. I I remember being in business school that, one of the first things that you do in your change management courses is you kind of quadrant box up your stakeholders into different groups according to their influence and their importance to the change or whatever it happens to be. And through that exercise, you can identify who is most important to engage and who you can kind of ignore. And usually the people with less power are the people you can ignore according to that model. And I rebel against this completely. I actually believe that your critics are your most important stakeholders, because they're the ones that can really derail the process. And so they're most important to involve. And so when you're talking about, critics, involving your critics, involving stakeholders that maybe disagree with you, one of the things that I propose to my clients is we involve them from the outset. So involving a subset or representative of, people that disagree very early on in the process to help you co-define your problem becomes really important because you have a slice, you have a vantage point of what you think the quote unquote problem or opportunity is, but likely they're going to have a completely different viewpoint. And maybe both of those viewpoints are not it. They might just be symptoms of a bigger problem, or there's a third vantage point that you're not looking at on your own. And so yeah, use a subset of stakeholders to help you with problem definition. Eat your own dog food. Don't design solo. So have someone check your assumptions. And often it's those that are critical of your assumptions or your opinions that are going to have that different perspective. And this is also really important because it de-risks your project. If you are going to be involving larger stakeholder groups as you go on, if you have that critical viewpoint from the outset, that really de-risks the journey for you in terms of what you're going to hear later on, because you're going to get snippets of that earlier. And so, yeah, that would be part of it. The other thing is to be really, really mindful of power distance. We're set up in a culture where, a lot of relationships feel transactional or are transactional, and power distance is prevalent in our society, and it makes it really difficult for people to engage in a conversation in a way that they would otherwise. And so, some of the small things that we do is like, when I'm meeting people in person, we don't put titles on name tags, for example. We have everyone show up in casual clothes. We have our chairs set up in a circle rather than in like a lecture style, etc. So when I say everything speaks, I mean everything speaks. Whatever we can do to lower power distance so that we can have everyone engaging at the same level is really, really important to that process. And finally, I mean, I would be really remiss if I didn't mention, the difference between extractive processes and inclusive processes. So a lot of the time when we're talking about consultations, when we're talking about getting a lot of people involved, stakeholders involved in contentious topics, what we're talking about is asking people a bunch of questions, extracting some sort of information, knowledge, or data from them, and then going off into a closed environment, into a closed room, and making decisions on behalf of those people. That is what I consider a consultation. I'm not a fan, because what that does is it really layers assumptions onto that process for those people, and you're making decisions for people that aren't at the table. And that's where the co-creation process really shifts the dynamic, where you're working with people and you're defining the problem space with them. And there's agency in that group to make the decision together. So.
Yeah, no, great tips, great strategies, and yeah, really important to include folks. And I love the ideas around the power dynamic and making sure everyone's feeling like they're on the same level and has input and has value in the conversation, right? And one of the other things that we is important to Synapsity is the idea of that diversity and inclusion. And from your perspective, what are some best practices when working with vulnerable and marginalized populations?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. When working with vulnerable and marginalized equity seeking populations, again, I mean, you have to think about your process all the way from the philosophy to your very minute tasks. So there's a lot of preparation involved, but the more that there is a need to build trust, the longer your process should be. And a lot of equity deserving or marginalized populations rightfully approach these processes with trepidation because there has been breaches in trust in the past. And so it really is about building that trust and building that dialogue and having them have ownership of the process. So when you involve people from the outset and you co-create with them, like I said, it de-risks your process, but it also creates ownership of the outcomes. And so using a co-creative process where people are actually empowered and given agency to be part of that decision-making is a best practice. The other thing is being very mindful about your data collection methodologies is another one. And then when we're talking about things like inclusion, you have to really consider how accessible your process is to people. And that can be from anything from, hey, do they have connectivity to, for example, do they need support for childcare? Do you need to pay them to be a part of this process? How can you actually involve these people in your process in a way that doesn't create more of a burden on their lives and is actually enabling them to be a part of your process? Are some of the things that you kind of really need to think about. And then finally, being really mindful about, for example, survey design, types of questions you're asking. And if you can involve representation from that system in the design of the broader intervention, again, is important. Nothing for people without them is basically the one sentence that I would put forth as a good guideline.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's so true. Some great points there. And you talked a little bit about that co-creation versus consultation. We know you don't like the consultation. Maybe a few other tips on how you're able to co-create with others and how you're able to kind of facilitate that co-creation.
Yeah. So typically, what you have to think about when you're trying to really co-create with people is that it's a longer upfront process than a typical consultative process would be. And that really refers to the preparation that it takes to get people into the room in the first place. So it kind of flips the consultation model on its head, where in a consultation, you would do a little bit of prep in which you are designing a survey, some questionnaire, a town hall, whatever it happens to be, where you want to go and ask people some questions. And then you collect some data, and then you go back and you analyze that data. And then based on that analysis, it goes somewhere else for a decision to be made. And then maybe you come back to that original group and you say, hey, here's the decision that was made. And that's the typical consultation process. In a co-creation process, it flips it on its head, because what you're actually doing is you're starting with a lot of research. You're starting with a lot of prep where you're gathering data without necessarily access to those groups directly, but with access to a sponsor group or a representative group where they can guide your research. So you're starting with a lot of data, and you're synthesizing that data, and you're checking in with that sponsor group in order to design whatever that larger intervention or decision-making process will be. And the difference here is you are actually designing something within which the decision will be made by that group. So you're not coming to them to ask them questions, to extract knowledge from them so that you can go off and make the decision. What you're coming to them with is, hey, here's what we've gathered. Now, based off of this, tell us what you think, and let's make a decision together. And that's really the shift. And that's really empowering because it means you're going to that group to get them to make the decision with you, and you're working alongside each other, and it's really powerful in that sense. It's also scary for a lot of people who have not done it before, because one of the terms I heard that kind of blew my mind once. I was talking to a group about this type of process, and it was a board that was thinking about involving more people into their strategic planning processes. And someone said, well, we don't want the great unwashed to be a part of this process. And I was like, oh, that is, first of all, not a very friendly term, but it requires a shift in thinking about who deserves to be a part of that process and who deserves to be at the table. And obviously there have been some long-standing traditions as to who does deserve to be at that table. And that's kind of the part of what we want to push. The other thing is it's scary for people because it's an emergent process, which means that you don't know what the outcome is necessarily going to be, because you're working with other people that might have different opinions than you. And so, yeah, that can feel scary, but it's really not, because of that problem definition space at the beginning, where you're actually saying, okay, here is the problem that we want to work on together, and here's where we're going to make some decisions together. And if you do enter into a co-creative process, the worst thing that can possibly happen is you start off as a co-creative process, and at the end, the main sponsor says, okay, well, we've heard your opinions. Thank you. We're going to go off and make the decision now. That kind of derails everything, and that entire effort will have been wasted. And so you have to be really clear at the outset what you are defining as that problem space within which you're inviting other people to co-create with you.
Yeah, no, great advice, right? And you see so much of that where it's like, okay, we're going to take your results and turn it around, and then we'll sort of push out a report to you at the end. But I love the idea of the kind of involving folks all the way through the process and getting them excited about creating it together, right? So, I want to talk a little bit about your latest endeavor, Paradeigma, and it's the award-winning consultancy you founded that helps leaders of mission-driven organizations tackle unseemingly unsolvable problems. So tell us a little bit about it. What was your impetus for launching it? And what are some of the problems you've been able to help solve since your inception?
Yeah, thanks. What was my impotence for launching it? I guess I don't have a good answer for that question. My impetus for launching it was I wanted to launch my own thing. But the types of unsolvable problems that we've been able to tackle, everything from food security in Eastern Ontario to vaccine deployment and delivery in sub-Saharan Africa. And so, a wide range of different problems that you might think of, the housing crisis, et cetera. And the idea behind Paradigma was that, I come from a pretty corporate background, corporate consulting background, which are lovely, complicated problems, right? Changing someone's bottom line is a nice, complicated problem, but there is some precedent and there's some benchmarking you can do, and you can figure it out. Whereas some of these seemingly unsolvable problems are those wicked problems where you can't necessarily come to an answer. You need large, diverse stakeholder groups that don't agree with each other and perhaps have been polarized in order to help you manage them. And that's all you can do. You can manage them. So anything that really touches society on a deep level and speaks to our survival would probably fall under this scope. All of the Sustainable Development Goals fall under this umbrella, and it's really those problems that define us as humans and can only be managed. And it's a pendulum swinging between a very bad state and a perhaps a little bit better state, and you can't really solve it. And those are the questions that are really interesting because those are the ones that they're very complex. They require cultural change, they require mindset shifts, and they require people working together. And so those were the questions that I really wanted to work on, because I think as a society, we've gotten worse, it feels like, at debate. We've gotten worse at speaking with each other, and we're becoming increasingly polarized. The world is becoming increasingly fast and complex and complicated. And so it was also a little bit of that wanting to practice both personally and trying to enable other people to be more comfortable with conflict, to be more comfortable with complexity, and to be able to really speak with one another. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, fabulous work. It's a great organization that you've founded. We'll put a link in the show notes so people can check it out and see some of the work that you've done. And I know you work a lot in the community as well. You've worked with the Quake Lab here, a local organization. You coach and mentor over at the Impact Hub, which is a great co-working social enterprise space. I'm wondering, why is it important for you to stay plugged in and give back to the community?
Uh, it is all about community. I think the defining thing that sets humans apart from our animal friends is that we've been able to organize together. And so it's all about community. It's all about being able to work together, collaborate together. And, you know, finding your place within that community, I think that's what home is to be able to find your place within that community. And so that's probably my impetus. I mean, it sounds selfish, but that's probably my impetus for giving back is to be a member of that collective, to be a member of that community, and Where did I hear this quote? I don't remember where I heard this quote, but something about, when the tide rises, all of our boats get lifted or something like that. And so the idea is, hey, what's good for my community is also good for me. Quake Lab is an amazing organization. Sharon, who heads up Quake Lab, I had the opportunity to work with her recently over one of the projects that we did for Impact Hub, which is also an amazing organization that's doing a lot of good here in Ottawa. Um, they're really, really fun to work with, fun group, and they're also solving some pretty sticky, complex systemic issues over at Quake Lab and with Impact Hub and their focus on the SDGs. So it was a real good natural alignment.
Yeah, and that really fits with Synapsity's mandate and giving back to the community and staying, sort of like you said, bringing all those boats up and bringing the tide up. Well, it's been fantastic to speak to you today. You're obviously very plugged in. You've got some great endeavors. You've got a great mind, problem-solving mind. And what do you have coming up in 2024? Any kind of projects or things you're getting excited about?
Yeah. I'm working on developing a curriculum to teach some systems thinking, collaborative design, and strategic foresight methodologies. Um, Probably through Impact Hub. We're still in talks about that, but that would be the one thing that I'm really, really excited about because um, I'm hoping to again democratize some of this knowledge, especially for social enterprises who are looking to make big impacts in the world. I always consider myself like a supporter of organizations that are doing much bigger things than I am. And so the idea is passing off some of this knowledge around, hey, how can we convene? How can we make changes in systems? How can we create movements? And also, how can we use strategic foresight methodologies in order to imagine alternative futures and then pull them towards us? And so that's kind of the big thing that I'm working on right now.
Awesome. Yeah, fabulous work. We'll keep an eye out for that. Really appreciate you joining us on the podcast. You've got some great insights, and we'll see how we can get you wrapped into the Synapsity community in the year ahead. So thanks again.
Thank you. Sounds good.
Thank you for watching Community Connections, brought to you by Synapse. Be sure to follow us on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more content like this. Until next time, stay connected.